It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. In Turkey, people are headed to a snap presidential and parliamentary election on June 24th. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Justice and Development Party, AKP, along with their electoral rally, the National Action Party, MHP, is expected to sweep into victory just prior to a looming economic crisis that many economists are predicting. On to talk about all of this with me is Ikram Ikti. He is an independent researcher and political analyst based in Berlin. He is co-editor of a new online magazine called Rapture, and you can find it at rapturemagazine.org. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, Ikram, let's start off with why these snap elections are being called and why these elections are being advanced from 2019 to now, and the conditions under which these elections are taking place.
Last year, in April 2017, there was a referendum in Turkey for changing the constitution, actually changing the regime of the entire country from a parliamentary system to presidential system. And this change was going to take place in November 2019, as we said. And 1 month ago, AKP Erdogan announced the date for the snap election for 24th of June. So this was rather unexpected news in Turkey. And with that, of course, there's a looming economic crisis coming. So the main answer for this, AKP is preparing for this looming financial crisis, and they want to be in power. They would like to secure the power while this is happening.
Ikram, tell us about the political issue of the 104 people that were sentenced for being participants of the coup attempt on Erdogan a couple of years ago. Tell us about what has happened and how this affects the election.
The failed military coup happened in July 2016, and afterwards, of course, there was a process of mass trials of military personnel who took part in this coup attempt against Erdogan. And these people were accused of being members and militants of a terrorist organization, which is led by Fethullah Gulen, a religious scholar who is in self-exile in US since over 20 years. So the interesting thing about this is this Fethullah Gulen movement in the economic field and social field was the main coalition partner of AKP, not as a political party, but as a social and economic force. So the first rupture occurred between those two movements, AKP and Fethullah Gulen movements, in late 2011 and beginning of 2012. And in the end of 2013, AKP was accused of a mass corruption scandal. This operation was led by the police forces, which were tied to Gulen movement. And AKP somehow managed to survive this. Erdogan somehow managed to survive this judicial attempt against the government. And this time, Gulen movement tried with their forces in the military in 2016 July. And since then, since the coup was failed, and since Erdogan survived this coup as well, of course, a process of mass trial began towards the end of 2016. And in the end of it, just a couple of weeks ago, 104 people were sentenced to life in prison, among which mostly military personnel. However, there is another dimension of this issue, because of course, after the military coup, AKP declared a state of emergency in Turkey. It's basically this country is ruled under state of emergency with executive orders. But we are talking about suspension of constitution, practically speaking. So AKP used this process against all forms of opposition in Turkey. For example, with those executive orders, thousands of people lost their jobs. The the pretext of it was to be members, being a member or aiding terrorist organizations in AKP's and Erdogan's eyes. So we're talking about people losing their jobs, losing their social insurances, losing even their passports. So they're stuck with no life in Turkey. Plus, another dimension of suspensions of some labor laws. For example, under the state of emergency, the strikes of working class, the strikes of workers in any sectors can be banned and forbidden. So this is effectively happening in Turkey as we speak. And if you look at the business circles, they're quite content with this situation.
Ikram, this raises the question of the HDP, the party of the Kurds, and where they are at in terms of this presidential election.
Well, HDP is one of the major forces of opposition in Turkey right now, as it was in the previous two elections. So, but this time the difference is the leader of the party and the presidential candidate of the party is in jail under the rule of emergency, as we say it. So, Selahattin Demirtas, the leader of HDP and the presidential candidate, effectively is in jail since November 2016 with the same charge as I mentioned before, being a member and aiding terrorist organizations who plan to overthrow the government and the constitution. So HDP is going to the elections in these conditions, but the popular support around the party is growing increasingly. So we are expecting that they will also they will pass the electoral threshold, which is 10% in Turkey nationwide, and will become a major force in the parliament in the next term.
In terms of this economic crisis, how is it transpiring on the ground, and why is it happening?
Well, this is mainly about this can be called a currency crisis for the moment. Why? Because the main indicator of this crisis is the loss of value of Turkish lira against dollar significantly. Last Wednesday, for example, Turkish lira lost 5% against US dollars, which was the highest point in the last decade. So how it is affecting the people on the ground in Turkey is this. Turkish economy is based on imports, not exports. So most of the companies in Turkey are indebted in foreign currencies, mainly US dollars. So such a decline of Turkish lira, such a loss of value of Turkish lira against US dollars, creating serious effects, insufferable losses in companies in Turkey in terms of their financial structure. So this would lead also to layoffs. For example, in Western Turkey, one large automotive company laid off 3,000 workers and closed all operations, halted all operations in Turkey and moved to Morocco. So in time, as the crisis looms, I'm afraid we will see more examples like this.
All right. With that, we'll leave segment 1 of this interview and invite you back to join us for our conversation with Ikram Ekti on the upcoming presidential elections in Turkey.